We go. How you doing, sir? All right, so Jonathan's got the live stream. It's actually up and running, and we're ready to call roll.
You guys are live.
Okay, we're calling City Development, Planning and Community Design Commission meeting, online version till order. Madam Secretary.
See, we're still hearing it from there. Can you go to the speaker adjustment?
Vice Chairman Rob Turkey. Present. Secretary Carol Wagner, I'm present. Member Jerry Rick.
No, on through
Member
Zoom.
Mike Saunders.
Through Zoom.
Member Brian Lewis.
It's gotta be,
Audio settings.
Member Glenn
Audio settings.
yeah, it's gotta be through the system, not, is it through the system for the, speaker?
It says Intel R display audio.
Can I get real closer? I don't have my glasses on, so.
Pause 1 second.
I have to see it, sorry.
We just want to make sure that we're getting your audios as you guys are
Speaker
talking.
needs to be, change the speaker to the, our Realtek. Under select speaker, and it says speakers Realtek.
It doesn't say.
The first option, right there.
Okay.
Ask them to speak again.
Can you speak one more time, Rob?
Why does it lose your, why do you lose your, can you hit that again? So I can,
This right here.
yeah, just so I can see your, go up to the top. Yeah, there you go. And then go to, select a microphone. What's the problem? HDMI, so we're not gonna get a good, recording. Click same as same as system. What does that do? Go to same as system. Now talk and see if they can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me, Rob?
I can.
All right.
Okay, I don't think it's, go ahead and go, and I'll go on to the other room and see if I can hear you.
Okay. Roll call's been taken. Talked with.
Before you go on, let it also be known that council liaison, Mayor Missy Waldman is in attendance, Carlos Trejo, the Director of Planning and Community Development, Jonathan Roper, Planning, CIS Coordinator, as well as Barbara Sondag, the City Manager.
Chairman, since this is our first time, we talked earlier today about trying to talk about the virtual meetings and kind of answer some questions. And we're also trying to make sure that we can figure out all the bugs before we actually have a true meeting with agenda items for action. There was a couple of things we had noted. To do this, there's a two-part process. Right now, the commission is all participating via Zoom. And that comes directly through my laptop, and you get to see everything that's within, you have full access of that laptop in there and anything I have in there. Then in a separate process, Jonathan is live streaming this through our electronic system, and ultimately it goes on to YouTube. And it goes on to YouTube. Jonathan, this thing's not charged. You have your plug.
The charger's, it's plugged in.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So Jonathan is operating in a separate system that runs a live stream through YouTube. That live stream is delayed because of the process. There's like a 20-second plus delay pending on the user and their internet access and capabilities. So it's going to make interesting when we get to the point of public comments. Any comments you guys make are, are pretty, come out really quick. There's no delay in that. But when we get to public comments that are submitted from YouTube, somebody can type up a comment and forward it. I won't receive it till about 20 seconds later. So we got to be cognizant though that, so traditionally when you're discussing an item and then we go straight to a motion, then to a vote, we have to be considerate to have some type of delay in that process.
Add me into the meeting, admit me.
Can you mention, for the users that are watching via YouTube, where that comment box may be?
That will go to it's going to go to where Jonathan is right now. We don't actually, all you see is what's in my screen. That's what's being live streamed. The computer that's doing the live streaming, that's not, their monitor's not going to be visible.
No, that's not what I meant.
Okay.
That text box might be, either below, the video or to the side of it, just to make sure they're aware of where it is.
It would be below.
Okay, great.
And you can, I actually have my phone on, kind of noting that. As a matter of fact, I just got a comment from Bruce McGregor saying that, so far it's working. But if you typically use YouTube, I believe right below, if you don't have a full screen on, if you're just looking at a portion of the screen, right below there's a box that allows you to submit comments. And then those comments come back to Jonathan. But again, the person that is commenting to something that they may have heard earlier, where you're going to be 20 seconds plus ahead, if that makes sense.
Carlos, I would also want to note that you have to be signed in as well on YouTube.
Oh, and it looks like you also have to be a signed in YouTube user.
Is that an easy process to do?
It's similar to creating a Gmail account.
For everybody in the audience who might be posting comments, I think it might be nice if you just had a general comment to just indicate general and then list what your comment is. Or if there's something that's related to a particular item, if you list maybe, the description of that item, it'll make it easier for us to go through those comments during the meeting. I know we had a brief discussion on this earlier, talking about, how we're going to handle the delay with writing these things, especially when we have a vote of something. And I know we don't have anything that we're voting on today, so that's not as big of an issue. But has there been any, this might be something for us all to discuss.
I think it's.
Hello?
I think it's worthwhile. Rob, I don't know if it's coming through your mic because everybody else is muted, but do you have a background speaker going on? We hear an echo on our end, but that might be just on the chambers.
I earlier heard an echo review. I thought it was related to you guys.
Okay, I think it is. Okay, excellent.
Hi, I just wanted to let as we all know, this is a pretty fluid situation, and tonight we're using live stream with YouTube. Actually, by your next meeting, we're going to be using Zoom as a webinar, and then there won't be this delay. So I think that's, people will still be able to participate. They'll be able to be there in live, in real time through the Zoom webinar. You will be essentially panelists, the commission, and then we'll be able to control when people speak and that type of thing. So for right now, tonight, we're using live stream through YouTube because that's how we advertise the meeting. And just within the last 2 days, as we've been looking for a webinar software that we could use, we found that through Zoom. And so actually for your next meeting, there won't be this delay. People will still be able to go to, after the meeting, to go to the website, or the city website, and we'll be able to see the video of the meeting. But if they want to participate, they would do so through Zoom, and there is no account that it would be free for everyone who's participating, and because there would be a link, people wouldn't have to sign in.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, I guess just as a reminder for everybody, if you have any public comments related to
Okay. One of the other things, and I apologize on there, so we sent out the agenda link, which creates a PDF for you, along with the links to all the reports. It's easy, in our offices, we have dual monitors, so we can run multiple things, and I made the assumption that I didn't think about that when I sent those out. So as we go forward, way back when, we used to put together paper packets and drop them off, and it may be something we have to do. Again, those would probably come in the week of the meeting, as opposed to that Friday. But I urge you to try to utilize the PDF versions as much as possible. And if there's any comments, or if anybody has any other thoughts on how to do this, let me know. But I think in terms of getting plans and reports, it'll probably be best to get a paper copy out to you.
Okay. Any more discussion on this, the technology and the issues? Or do you want to move on? Carlos?
All set?
Okay, let's move on to some of the discussion items. We'll go to item A, chapter 435 fences, and this is a discussion regarding the current regulations relating to fences. Carlos, can you handle them?
Yeah, both Jonathan and I, he went over and put together the report that was published in the on the agenda link. But ultimately, this was kind of following up on our last meeting when we had a variation request for fence placement along Old Bottom Road. And we decided to go back and take a look at, and there it's at least within the past year, the petitions that have come in, for the exception of one, have all been granted. Which leads us to believe, that the current regulations for fencing aren't working ideally as they would, or they're not practical to today's conditions. So we went back and took a look at what some of the neighboring communities have been doing, and those were attached in Jonathan's report. But the ultimate question would be, if we draft some type of amendment regarding fencing, what is the goal? Are we looking just to address street side fencing only? Is it only specific streets, or the issue we've always had are these corner lots where a rear yard abuts a street side. When we look at retaining walls, when we look at street separations, I think when you look at the graphics below, you'll see what I thought was the spirit and intent of the Olivette ordinances. It was to create a nice street appearance along street yards, not necessarily front yards, as compared to some of our neighbors, as you see in the slide of Ladue on the left, where a lot of the major corridors are kind of boxed or tunneled in. So again, the best thing to do, to start the process is to kind of have this discussion of, you know, what is our goal ultimately in regulating.
I definitely see the concern that you're talking about, Professor. And I definitely think that everybody most likely is in agreement that we don't want to tell them that. But didn't we have some streets, you know, some previous ones, where we had, you know, the fences abutting pretty close, and at first I thought that was, the picture was, one of the fences that we recently reviewed, maybe a few months ago. And how close would you know, those fences be compared to what it looks like with this price road?
We have several. As a matter of fact, two new homes that were built in the Oak Estates subdivision. I'm going to go to a Google Maps view and get to the street view and kind of show you where we had a similar condition. Bear with me 1 second. You know, because not necessarily is it Old Bonham Road. Yeah, and you can see the two homes right here where my cursor is. There's one here, an older home that doesn't have a fence, and then a new home here.
I don't think it's showing up on our screen.
Jonathan? Hold on 1 second. Yeah. My apologies. It's part of the new process. Okay, so now you should be able to see. Can you see it okay? Okay. These are two homes off of, primarily they're addressed off of Ashmont, but the back of their yards abut Ingle Lane. So these two homes were able to enclose their rear yards, even though they're street side yards, with 6-foot privacy fences. Where across the street, the homes are addressed off of Ingleton, and they wouldn't be permitted to have a fence that close as those. And it was what exactly was the intent? Because the intent here then isn't equitable. That one side can do it, but the other side can't. If it was based on trying to preserve the street side appearance of Ingleton.
I'm getting a street overhead view of now I see your cursor. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't getting it before.
I think if I go to the street view, it hasn't been updated yet, but let me try it in this direction. No. Jonathan, do you know where, any others? We do know down here, this is off of Ingleton, which is a street directly adjacent. And you can see how the property's address on Radford, which is on the opposite end of this house, they can screen in along the street, but those address off of Ingleton wouldn't be permitted to do so. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make anybody dizzy. But you can see how, you know, it doesn't seem that if the intent is to preserve the streetscape appearance, the current system isn't the way to do it. And it becomes difficult for Jonathan and I to explain to somebody why somebody on the other end of the street can do it, but not the opposite end of the street. Then we get to the points when we get to more of our larger collector roads like Old Bottom Road. What is what are we trying to, what is the goal? Do we want to maintain that open appearance, or is it reasonable to allow a process for fence enclosures along the roadway? And, and maybe it is something that goes just through the commission review. But it shouldn't be a variation process where the decision can become, lack of a better word, arbitrary.
Do you have any thoughts? Have you guys brainstormed or discussed any ideas?
Well, Jonathan did have a couple in his report, and I can note that before handing it over to Jonathan, the one issue that we had in our last meeting was in terms when the ornamental fencing, which is limited to 36 inches, conflicts with the pool enclosure requirements from the building code, which requires a minimum of 48 inches. Now, a pool enclosure, in no way does it say it has to be a privacy fence. But in this case, wanted to point that out, that we have two conflicting codes in terms of heights that can, that are incompatible. And then Jonathan did do some research on a couple of other communities.
Yeah, so in looking at a few other communities being Ladue, Creve Coeur, and Webster Groves, what's allowed within yards facing the street are up to 42 inches or 4 feet. They also note they all have different. They have different. Well, they have the same height but different ornamental standards. Some are pretty specific to the type, and they actually provide images, such as Webster's. And they also do talk about a sight triangle, which we don't have. We currently have in our ordinance under the policing powers, but that's more of a police item, not a planning item, about a sight triangle, such as if you're coming to as a corner lot. Yes. Yes.
If anybody else is experiencing this, but it's a pretty strong echo that it's a little difficult to follow. Is there any adjustments to your mic that you can make?
1 second, please. Still looking. Just give me 1 second. How about now? Okay.
Maybe just try to speak a little slower too. That might be helpful.
Will do. So the three communities that were looked at were Creve Coeur, Webster Groves, and Ladue. In the front yard area, they allow up to 4-foot fences that are ornamental and that have opening between the slats between the fences. Where they differ, two of the three cities call out they distinguish the actual lot conditions themselves being a yard next to a street versus calling out if it's a front yard or a front yard with a double frontage lot. So they are actually just straightforwardly say that if your yard faces a street, it's 4 feet. Now, there could be a commission type review to go higher than that, but it's just 4 feet. And that's some of those standards are in your staff report, like page 8 of 10 has the Webster Groves standards in there. Also, I will note page 2 of your staff report has most, not all, but most of the streets that would be affected. It's around about 443. The report says 441, but I think it's more around 443 lots, residential lots in Olivette that would be affected with this. So in looking at the ordinance of Creve Coeur, Ladue, and Webster Groves, I was having a conversation with Carlos about, like, well, are streets like Price and Dealman, we definitely want to keep those more open because you have more traffic on those streets, but do smaller streets like Covington Meadows or, interior roads within an actual subdivision where there are fewer traffic, is there a difference between the two? And that's something that the commission would kind of, looking at the map on page 2, kind of talk about, is if there is a difference between a Price Road and a Dealman versus a Arbor Road or a Covington Meadows or a Hilltop. Is there a difference? And but the map is there for you guys to see the properties that would be impacted with this ordinance, with an ordinance.
This seems kind of complicated. And, have you talked to anybody at Webster Groves or Ladue or Creve Coeur, just to see how well, the different styles, trying to address some of these items, how well those were able to be managed?
Haven't spoken to anyone from any other cities about it, just looked at their ordinances.
I'm kind of curious about that. The more complicated we make this, the harder it is for anybody to understand what they're allowed to do. And then we're going to get a ton of reviews, I imagine.
And Chairman, I would like to just clarify a little bit. There's that echo again. So like the other cities noted would have, they basically just have 2. Either you have a yard area that is abutting a street and you get 4 feet, or it's not and you get another number like 6 feet. So their ordinances should just be, you either get 4 feet if it's facing a street or 6 feet if it's not. And I think that's where their ordinances go.
Okay. What about if you, I'm just out of curiosity or thinking, I do like the maximum 4 feet, along a street. But if they put their fence back with a larger setback, you think then we might be considering a higher fence?
That's where I saw one ordinance where it talked about, this was a very specific example, but if there was a house, so if you had a corner lot and your house was, let's say, 8 feet away from the sidewalk into the street area, could you have a higher house? And I believe there was something to do with about, you could have it up to the wall of your house and go back. So you could have a higher fence on, I need to look if it's one of the 3 communities we just talked about, or is that, I did look up a number of ordinances, so that was in one of the ordinances that would allow if it matched, your house, at the back of your house, to go back. But otherwise, I didn't really see, I would have to check the ordinance for that.
See, this is Mike, if I could weigh in here. I think there's 2 conditions that we're looking at here. We have a corner lot, and then we have a lot that has yards that have a street on both the front and the back. And I would offer that corner lots, we should just treat like regular lots. The only, and I think it's the example you gave us, Carlos, that's where we do have a few where the lots face 2 streets. And
exceptions based on, you know, a particular situation, that if it warrants it.
And Mike, can you address in terms like a corner lot being treated like every other lot? Is that
Well, it has two front yards.
correct? Okay, and that's what,
You know, you treat those with your setbacks, right? With
Mhm.
two front, it has two front, you know, two front yard setbacks. We just treat it like, you know, both yards are treated, as front yards, just like we do setbacks. Now, you might think about fences that can encroach in there, but, you know, we certainly don't want the image you had earlier. You know, open ornamental fences, we could approach differently than the solid privacy fences. And I fully understand why people want privacy fences. But I think, I mean, that would be the way I'd look at it. You know, there's some advantages and disadvantages when you get a corner lot. But, well, you know, the way Olivette was developed, we do have a lot of subdivisions that, well, not a lot, but there's enough that it warrants this discussion where, you know, people have front and backyards facing streets.
mhm.
Mike, when you were talking about the difference between an open fence versus a closed fence, I mean, or what are you thinking with the closed fence? Are you thinking to have it more setback, or?
No, I'm saying we don't even allow those in these, in front yards. And like I said, the only thing I would be open to this discussion is the example we just saw, where, okay, you know, I do have a backyard, and there is maybe some desire for some privacy. And those, but that would be the exceptional lot, but we would not allow that. Or I don't know that I would propose to allow something that solid like that to encroach into what we would call our front yard.
Yeah, I would agree that a backyard should have the ability to have the privacy if you wanted it, especially whether it's animals or kids or something like that. But yeah, why we would box in a front yard doesn't make a lot of sense. I would agree.
But Brian, what about when you have a corner lot? Would you treat both edges? Do you agree with the idea of keeping both fronts along the road as considered front yards?
Well, and I think it depends on, so I have a corner lot, but as an example, but it's more of a side and front. So because mine's more of a side and front, I don't think a fence makes sense. If one of them happened to be a backyard, I would think that you have the ability to kind of block that in. So I guess my thought is people have the right to have privacy if they want, but doesn't mean they can build like a castle around their house.
So does the idea of having different setbacks make sense? I like the idea potentially so it doesn't box in the street, but I also don't like it because you're gonna have fences lining up differently with each other.
So that, I guess I'm trying to understand what you're in that situation. So if they have a corner lot and we said they can only back up or only fence in the backyard, you're worried that the fence won't line up with another fence?
Exactly. If the setback, you know, is, let's say, you know, 15 feet from the property line, you know, or, Carlos, what do we currently have the setbacks, you know, for the front, you know, for the front, side, and rear yards?
For fences, you know, the privacy fence, which is something that would be completely opaque, cannot extend beyond the front building line. So you can place it right on a property line, but any street side, it can't go beyond the front property line. And to make it easier, we kind of say it can't go beyond the front edge of the building. Usually that's a little clearer. Most buildings are placed as close as they can on the streets, you know, especially on a corner lot. And there are some situations where they're not.
So that would include the signs.
Correct. On a corner lot, remember they end up with a front yard appearance that's somewhat of an L shape for them. And then on the side or rear, you can go up to the property line.
Okay. And so we currently have that in place right now, which is why we're talking about it, to make sure we don't box in the streets.
But Carlos, this is Mike.
I have a question. What would we do in the case of someone who, say, wants to fence their front yard in, and they have a pool? So they have one type of fence for the front and a different type for the back, for the pool? Is that what we're saying? I mean, if they have an open fence, then that's okay for the front. They have to have a closed type fence for the rear for the pool.
It can still be an open fence. I think, isn't the one we approved last week or 2 weeks ago? That was an open fence. It was a wrought iron fence, but it had pickets. It wasn't a privacy fence. So I don't think a closed, I mean, people might want it, Carol, but I don't know that it's required to be opaque to be, for a pool.
I think you're right, Mike. Carlos, is that right?
Correct. I'm going to show you the handout that we provide. Bear with me 1 second. And hopefully, Rod, that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, this does. This is good. But if we had a rear yard that backed up to the street, would that be considered, the same as a front yard?
No, the code actually calls out an exemption. If you have a double frontage lot and your access is only to one street, you can fully enclose the opposite lot as a privacy fence. That's best seen when I go. Bear with me 1 second. Yeah.
Carlos, while you're looking at this, Mike, does it differentiate between public street and private street as far as some of those yard space?
No. Here's an example of somebody's backyard, and they have a privacy fence, but their backyard abuts a right of way.
Right, right.
Looks like there's four, 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like there's 4 lots down that street that has that condition. On Eagleton and, I'm sorry, and,
Angle.
yeah, front from both.
Correct.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this map that Jonathan put together, and that's certainly a street, and Ashmont turning the corner, has got, 3 lots that are like that, in Eagle, and Ashmont, and then there's another street, Stony Side, and Downey, that are that condition, and then another one off of, street I'm on, like Sony, it looks like there's a few lots like that. Other than that, other lots that have fronts and backs, and it sounds like we already addressed those with the exception.
Did you have a count on how many they were the double frontage?
That's one that I would actually have to revise this to maybe break out a few. This is Jonathan. A few different color codings, because this map actually shows for the majority these are corner lots. Michael, you just pointed out a few lots that have the double frontage. There are also lots such as if you are in Oak Estates, if you could find where Lindley is, it's a very pretty wide street. And if you go over just a little bit to the right and down a bit, you have these two lots that actually, there's basically three lot lines because how the street curbs, the street actually, it's not a corner lot. It's a lot without technically like well, it's not a corner lot, but it's in its own category with difficulty. There are also, there's about at least four of those, I believe, in Olivette, and I would have to revise this map to point them out. But and the commission did see that. I think that is I can't remember the address offhand. I'm sorry. But I would have to revise this for you. But to answer your question, Michael, there's about less than 20 of those cases, I would think.
There's one cul-de-sac off the angle that's got to be like this, and in my advances to some near Brad Estes. So, but anyway, I guess my point is that maybe it's not that many lots that we have this issue with, that's the issue, and maybe I go back to ask Carlos, you know, I'd have to remind myself what exceptions we made or what variances we made in those conditions and why we did, but it sounds like there's a concern. And I'd like know a little bit more about the concern, I guess, Carlos, that you and Jonathan have, regarding the fence. And that's not to say it doesn't need to be thought through and maybe rethought a little bit, clear up, but I don't know about everybody else, but I'm a little bit unclear about what problem we're trying to solve.
Brad?
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on that. We have ordinances, we have schools, occasionally we have to provide variances because all these homes are exceptions to all of our rules. I don't understand why we're trying to come up with some rule that fits these few exceptions, because let's face it, you know, it's not every day we're dealing with fence. These instances are few and far between. I don't know how we're gonna come up with an ordinance, or why we would bother trying to come up with an ordinance to fit all these exceptions to the rule, when the situation we have right now, they ask for a variance, they work with us, they get a fence they like, we get a fence that looks nice. The current system seems to work, and I don't know how much time we need to spend. It seems like we're trying to solve an unsolvable problem by writing one rule that's gonna cover these few fences that pop up once or twice a year. I don't know if the time is worth the value.
Yeah, I kind of see everybody's point. I mean, Carlos, what do you think? I mean, how many of these have we seen?
I think within the past year, or at least 18 months, we've had 5. At least 5. And the issue I have is that all 5, well, for the exception of 1, have been granted, which then kind of poses the problem is, you know, if we're not going to follow the code, the code, what is the, I understand, Brad, what you're kind of noting, and I do agree, but it makes it difficult for us to try to tell somebody that, it has to be done this way, or you pay $150 and you can get it done like that. That's where it becomes, it's not being very equitable, and there.
This is my opinion, and maybe I'm having a senior moment, but it would be very helpful for me anyway to understand those variances. I remember talking about fences. I remember, them being very important issues to folks, but I cannot sit here and say I really remember exactly the circumstances of the variances. Maybe it would be helpful, for me anyway, to understand what we did in the past, just give you sort of heartburn, and think about maybe how we would adjust it. And again, maybe other people remember, those particular cases that I'm getting old and senile.
Were they all right?
Jody's got
I echo what Mike was think it's possible to create a single ordinance to cover all the variations in property tax and lot sizes and locations that we have in all of it? It's not possible. But the question, I guess, that Carlos and Jonathan are posing is, it seems that we have an issue that's worth revisiting, and that's either we need to make sure that it really is an issue and that, if so, how can we deal with it?
If I could,
I hope that when they see a problem like this, it's something that we in order to bring it to us.
if I could also follow up.
Homes in a year and a half will be an issue.
Possibly, yes.
How many, or did it need variances? How
Talk
many
up.
fences did you and Jonathan approve at the, at your level?
We can get those numbers for you later, but we don't have those offhand, and we couldn't tell.
Did you hear that question?
How many overall fences have been approved at compliant? Mhm.
Because we don't hear about those.
Okay.
And Michael, I wanted to clarify part of this in looking at what we're discussing is just currently many of the fences that come into the front yard sometimes would like to be higher than what we allow, which is 3 feet. And looking at other ordinances to see, how we compare with other communities, which we don't always have to match theirs. We are different, and we're entitled to being, showing those differences with their ordinances. But one of the items that a lot of times does pop up are that if we had an ordinance today that says you can have a 4-foot fence, same ornamental standards, if it were to be 4 feet in height, one, does that, is the commission okay with seeing more 4-foot ornamental fences? Do the residents, as we do serve, our residents and try to make things easier when possible, is a 4-foot fence for them? Is that something that they're more likely to come in to, speak to one of the inspectors and say, hey, I want to put up a 4-foot fence in my front yard? And I don't know how many times do we have to say, no, it's a 3-foot fence. I honestly don't know that many, but and finally, the other point is that if we're spending some of the ordinances that we changed in the past were to be more to clarify those ordinances, but to also relieve the commission of having to look at everything if it kind of follows a standard. So in the past couple, 18 months or so, if more of these fences were just ornamental and all the issue is that it went 42 inches instead of 36, and the commission was okay with the look of them, they were approved. So part of this is what goes into a commission is also the staff report, the time that staff spends with the petitioner, which we don't mind. It's just if we're looking to do, how much time did we spend where we could have been working maybe on pursuing other items that the commission wants to pursue. So that's the way we kind of see it is if they followed the 4-foot rule, they would got a permit, and that takes a lot less time than going to a site visit, having to look at these, if ultimately it's just the commission's okay with a 4-foot fence at the end of the day that's ornamental. So why go through the hassle if it's going to be okay?
I think that the difficult part from the staff report, and this is Carlos, in putting together is that the criteria for the variation it uses wording from Board of Adjustment, which is pretty rigid. However, the application has been based on aesthetics. I would rather see, again, it's not trying to do all one size fits all. It's just to make sure that the process for the review, how they're applied and how they're granted is uniform. And you know, ideally, the code, you know, one solution would be is just to remove the process of the variation and just say that fences in the street side need to go through commission review. And then at least we're being honest. We're just saying that those are not administrative decisions. Those decisions are on a case-by-case basis by the commission. Where we have difficulty is trying to guide the applicant or the property owner on why is the code set this way and what do I have to do. And most of the time, we're dealing with, you know, somebody is primarily more upset that they can't do what they want to do, and see it as an obstacle to get something done, or, you know, in there. And it, I think the format has to be more be friendlier and upfront. Again, the commission has the authority to review things on a case-by-case basis. I think the way the current ordinance is written is that they're supposed to provide a hardship, and yet, you know, of those 5 I refer to, you know, there really wasn't anything that presented a, you know, viable use of the property, except that they had to go through a process, which is okay. And again, that's going back to maybe we just need to say that, you know, from an administrative perspective, anything in front yard has to go through a commission review, and then at least it's up front.
I think that makes sense. And, you know, if you wanted to, you know, basically even add that if it's an open fence, then it's not as big of an issue, but it's more about the, you know, the 6-foot privacy fences are the big issue that I think that we have, especially for these, you know, rear yards along a street, which seems to be limited, you know, compared to, you know, all the other issues.
And we did have one instance, I think, early last fall, where where a petition was denied only because a neighbor showed up in opposition, where yet down the block a similar fence was approved without any issues, but nobody voiced any concerns about it. And that's where, again, you look at it, things being applied equitably. I still can't find the distinction between those two approvals, the approval and the denial.
Well, how about we do this at this time? How about we, you know, kind of move on? Maybe we can get, you know, some other maps that kind of show the differences between the corner lots versus the ones that have the streets on both sides, you know, to help with that. And maybe we can kind of talk about some options to make it simple, but kind of move things along, if you will, to give you guidance with what you guys need to do. But then if we do have, you know, those cases where it needs to come to the board, that we address those. But then we at least give them guidance a little bit if it's an open fence or, you know, something like that, that it, you know, would be easier to approve. And maybe explain a little bit too as to, you know, the rationale or the reason.
No, it's a good point, and I appreciate the commission's comments on there, and there's some things we can bring back. And yeah, I don't see this as a critical issue. It's just based on the last review we had, and trying just to keep things up.
Okay. All right, so if anybody has anything else, otherwise we'll move on. Anybody have anything else?
So well, I'm still confused about what the next step is regarding this issue. Or is there a next step?
I think Carlos is going to go back, or Carlos and Jonathan are, you know, basically kind of revise those maps so we can kind of see which particular properties would potentially be impacted. And then if we have any additional, you know, thoughts or guidance or recommendations for changes, that would be presented maybe at the next meeting.
Well, the only thing I would ask, go back to what I said earlier too, Carlos, would be very helpful, and I apologize, and I know you're overworked, especially right now. But even the examples you gave would really be good to just go back and remind ourselves of these examples that are giving you some heartburn. So we can be reminded of what we did, and you know, that might help us in how we go forward. So,
Good point.
You know, and we have those two down. We have Commissioner Saunders' request on the variances, and that's pretty easy to put together. And then Ms. Rich had asked about how many permits are approved administratively, and we can get that list done. Whether we can refine it, we'll do our best to get that before the next meeting, or if not, the first meeting in May. It's not a critical amendment in any sort. It was just based on the activities from the last commission meeting. So.
Okay, great. Let's move on then to item B, unless there's any other comments. Okay, we'll go to stormwater management. This is a discussion regarding stormwater management practices. Staff report, is this Carlos or John?
A little bit of both. Again, from our last meeting, we talked about the 5 categories in there that kind of impact how stormwater is managed. One is topography, then construction, soil conditions, weather, and infrastructure. And we seem to have a pretty well aspect of that. We further broke each one of those down to each individual components, and then Jonathan's been doing some review on topology. And one of the things that we've been kind of talking about is, you know, when we look at topology, there are 3 tiers. There's the top of the hill, in which our current regulations at least take into account for new construction that there will be detention basins put in place for the rooftop of the new home. So you know, the actual home improvement isn't generating any additional stormwater generation, you know, down that hill, since they're up on top. Secondly, is that, you know, they do have all the other improvements, whether it's the decks, the pools, the patios, the driveways, the driveway turnarounds, sheds, and all those things slowly add up, and those aren't necessarily addressed in our current ordinance regulations, though we have for some additions and some major accessory structures put in place that they have to provide BMPs and things of that nature. But usually somebody on top of the hill, they generally are not impacted adversely by stormwater, but their actions do impact the stormwater as you get to the next 2 tiers, those that are in the middle, and then those at the bottom of the hill or at the bottom tier. I'm going to talk about the bottom tier. You know, they're the bottom, so they're getting all the stormwater, and there really isn't any viable solution in terms of addressing those beyond the boundaries of the property. You know, they usually are going to have to develop ways to handle that excess stormwater that's coming beyond their boundaries or edges, because they don't control the people up on top of the hill, and they have minimal control of the stormwater that's being generated from the improvements in the middle of the hill. So they have, you know, possibilities to try to address it with infrastructure, possibilities to try to do BMPs to help absorb the water, and then do whatever necessary improvements are to protect their investment or their, you know, which typically would be their structure, their home. But, you know, from a regulatory side, it's very minimal assistance we can provide. They're at the bottom, and they're just a big collector in there, and they can kind of divert it or so, but it's difficult to control everything that's coming from beyond their boundaries, from the middle and from the top. That middle tier, they're kind of like the managers. All they can do is manage the direction of the stormwater. Again, they're impacted by those up on top, and as you continue to go through that middle tier, you're just getting more and more in there, and the best thing you can do, your solutions are based on how you manage it, and that could be through the grading of the property, through trying to slow down velocities, to doing BMPs, and the detention. But those are the ones that really are critical to understand. Those are the ones that we see in terms of complaints. A majority of the time are people that are kind of in that middle tier, and how they manage that. Again, from a regulatory perspective, or in terms of what can the city do, again, we're cognizant about what's going on the top of the hill, requiring the basins and things like that. But we really don't have any power to change the direction of water going down, downhill. Outside of trying to redirect it in areas where it causes minimal disruption to any of their existing improvements, like the house, or other, infrastructure that they have on the property grounds. But a lot of the time, again, the only thing we can provide or assist is to better direct. And even when a new house is built in the middle of in that middle tier, they have the basins, so there's not additional runoff that's generated from the roof area. They regrade the property, but ultimately, the water is still flowing in the same direction that it was flowing before. So what we try to do is just make sure that they redirect it in a fashion that it doesn't impact, especially a home. Not as critical as a shed or a detached garage or so. But that's going to continue to flow, and you really can't solve, a stormwater problem with a middle tier in there. And that was some thoughts in there. Jonathan's been looking at the contour maps and trying to identify, can we at least identify where these tiers are? And I'll let him talk about some of the information he's put together in there. And it looks like to do so, you have to go down to this micro neighborhood level and really look at the topographies and make distinctions by who's up on top, who's in the middle, and who's at the very bottom and in there. Jonathan, you have comments?
Just give us 1 second, guys. So, excuse me. In looking at the tiers, first we kind of need to understand. Sorry, there's an echo again. In looking at the tiers, try to understand where, a drop of water from what's called a watershed, where one drop of water anywhere on this lot or this area winds up at the same collection point. Ultimately, as you know, water ultimately goes to the Mississippi and Olivette, but it travels there primarily, and I will have a better map that kind of shows these things, because we're kind of working on it to see just a general idea before we actually spend a lot more time on it. What you see on the screen right now are especially the yellow bordered portion, the red bordered portion that's just south of Olive, and that highlighted red piece north of Olive. Those are all different watersheds in Olivette that drain to a particular point. So like we would need to understand how much water relatively can we expect, where are the low points, and so like if you're anywhere on Old Bottom, for example, you're at the top of either the watershed that goes south towards Ladue, or the watershed that goes where the walking and biking trail is, and behind Bond Hills, Bond Price, there's that concrete channel. Basically, that's the low point where water goes. So this piece would understand, and these sub-watersheds, were kind of areas that we need to look out for, distinguishing, a house on Old Bottom versus a house at the very bottom. But then there are also tiers if you're at, let's say, Harvest or Cherry Tree at the top of the hill, you have the advantage of having a curb right there, so water actually flows from the street on Ingle around your property. While Cherry Tree would be in one of the lower tiers, it's just there's a difference there. So we're going to continue to look at those. This is just a very rough watershed map. The lines, if you're wondering, the lines at the bottom there are actually what staff looked at are the collection points going south towards Ladue, and those orange finger-looking things are actually each swale drainage area that water lets out. Yes, ma'am.
Your voice is kind of fading in and out.
I'm sorry about that. How about now?
It's very echoey.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would just say we'll continue to look at the watersheds here, but and we'll have a better map that's probably a little more clear to you guys in the next 2 weeks. So.
Okay, good. Let me just ask a quick question, or just a thought. I mean, a lot of these, just like you guys seem to be kind of pointing out, these seem to be, more the focus are neighborhoods. And the way the neighborhoods were developed, the way the topography is for those particular neighborhoods, and also the way the neighborhoods were laid out. And I mean, we're dealing with existing conditions, and I'm wondering with some of these issues, if they should be addressed more on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, with the help of multiple homes, as opposed to the city directing. I mean, I think maybe we, implement like some of the items that we just did, that we've done in the past. But, as far as, the water flowing across several properties throughout the neighborhood, if there's a particular issue with the neighborhood, maybe it should be addressed by those, particular homes.
I don't disagree with that. That's actually one of the next steps on here. So there's kind of two, and I don't want to confuse one set of tier systems with the second set of tier systems, and I apologize for being maybe that'll get better. So one item of this, and I use Cherry Tree and Harvest, so that's a really easy block to pick on there. You're exactly right. If one would hope that out of this plan would come, there's different levels of different responsibilities. There's MSD issues with some of these pipes that are just disconnected or unsized. That's not a neighborhood issue. That is an MSD issue. There are some issues that need to be looked at on a neighborhood level. So, for example, going back to the Cherry Tree or the Harvest, it would take both houses on, what is that street? Ingle, I think? Yeah, Ingle Lane. It would take the street to the west of Harvest. I forget, I think it's Ingle. Which one? Ingleton, I'm sorry. It would take the houses on Ingleton and the houses on the west side of Harvest in order to implement a solution. Having, I guess, somewhat proof of that when the neighbor at the bottom of Harvest or Ingleton talk about, well, it's this new house that is doing it, we then can point to a document to show actually it's from at Ingleton, at Ingle, which is the high point of that little block there. That's where your issue kind of starts. It's the water that is coming down at 744 Ingleton will eventually end up at 701 Harvest. So with that understood, and they do need to understand that. Also, I'm sorry again about the echo. Also, what this should do is to kind of give them, we're not doing their engineering calculations for them, but they at least know the starting point to say, I need to include 40 houses into this. And if we went out for a bid for an engineer, they have a much more, they know where they're starting at this point. rather than everyone right now has an issue. Everyone right now has an issue. However, no one kind of knows what to do, and they just blame the house next to them at this point. So we kind of have proof to get a grasp over what we're actually looking at and who's impacting who and for why.
Okay. I wonder if, somewhere in our, policies or things that it's, we kind of talk, if we kind of explain that these issues can't be resolved by Olivette alone, but it is a community, and on a more neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street basis. Because, like I said, I just don't think we can solve all these things. I think we can help, but not have necessarily a program in place that's going to resolve all these issues.
I don't disagree. It's tough to have a program, but I think my concern with just saying it's neighborhood by neighborhood is street by street is it kind of leaves it where what if two neighbors totally disagree? What's their recourse? Is it lawsuits then? Is it? I think it is. I agree. I don't want to put I don't know. It's similar to the fences. I don't think we can put an overarching law or mandate and order, but maybe some guidelines around. You should make sure to have gutters. You should make sure to have this. You should make sure to not run off into somebody else. But how is it enforceable? I'm not sure.
I don't like the idea of leaving it up to the neighborhoods because you're going to get a patchwork of ideas from people that really don't understand stormwater. And I'm not saying any of us are experts, but we at least have Carlos and Jonathan to guide us through all this. When are we going to start moving to solutions? I keep thinking about things we can do, and I understand it's a lot of rain that falls, but I keep thinking, why don't we have like a rain barrel drive? Why aren't we encouraging people to, why don't we partner with Hartke and Home Depot and whatnot, get rain barrels out there, save thousands of gallons? Are we doing anything to encourage rain gardens and other type of landscape anythings? I don't know what else there is on a surface level we could be doing, but if we're serious about this, look, we all know it rains, we all know water rushes downhill. Let's not keep revisiting that. Let's look at some solutions. What can we do as a city to finally start addressing this?
So, Rob?
Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
I think it helps for a homeowner to understand why there's a problem and it's at the neighborhood level, and that therefore if I'm the guy at the bottom of the hill, there may not be anything I can do. If it's going to take the cooperation and investment of 20 other houses, and they may not all have the cash to address it. I'm not quite sure what we do with that information, other than I think helping people understand why they're having a problem might be helpful. But I'm not sure that there's anything I'm not sure what the city's role in solving that one.
Well, maybe we could put out some guidance documents or best practices and incorporate some of the ideas that Brad is talking about.
Yeah, and we will get to solutions shortly. It's because I honestly, I usually jump to solutions right away, and then I kind of go back to see, the history of it, which usually what we like to do is kind of give the history, give the issues, and understand those. At the same time, if you have a solution, please speak up, because we purposely have not really given any solutions at this point, because we didn't want to jump the gun and go into, this is why we think, this is the solution and it doesn't matter about anything else. And because the solutions that I even have today, I have in the back of my head as we talk about these tiers, as we talk about this, to see is this a viable solution, yes or no. But under the, we have the topography, the soil conditions, the infrastructure, as we break those in and dive a little deeper into those, we, as staff, realize, okay, if we did do that solution, it probably wouldn't have been a good idea, or if we did do that, it may or may not have worked. But going about it this way, where we give a little bit history on these things, kind of helps just a little bit this process to inform the solution. So, but if you have them, please email them, or please tell us during a meeting. But we're just not ready for solutions yet.
Is there any more diagrams that we're going to go through?
No, at this point, I think to kind of test this process out, this is probably all we have for now.
Okay, good, good. All right, let's move on to item C, the City of Olivette Comprehensive Plan. Overview of the 2006 strategic plan and discuss procedures and a schedule for an update. Carlos?
Okay, so we created that link on the city's website for the commissioners to access some information regarding comprehensive plans, land use plans. Also to look at various plans from some of our neighboring communities in the region, and then looking at the request for proposals that have been issued. And of course, we've only found one that had the submission that was submitted. Carol, you had commented about the Kirkwood plan. Again, we're at the process of looking at, just to have a general discussion of how we're going to update our strategic plan, and how that document would be different from a land use plan, but more of a policy document. And the one for Kirkwood, Envision Kirkwood, kind of plays that same type of role. And I kind of put it here up on that slide. If everybody gets an opportunity to go through that one, I think it had some broad objectives and goals, and then it kind of identified the specific action steps to get there. So it was pretty easy, simple to read and to go through. And then it gives you an idea of what the process and the components that are in the plan, because there is a lot of data analysis and existing plan review that's put in together, and then they come up with specific goals and action steps. Carol, I was hoping that you would comment on some of the things you liked about this plan.
I think it was I like the way it was organized. And I really like the emphasis throughout the plan, not only identifying the goals and the tasks by chapter or subject matter, they're all kind of tied back and built on one another. So they had a kind of a vision, overarching goal, it was broken down into reasonable action steps for each topic, and they kind of built on each other. And so it made it very easy when you thought about implementation to take pieces of it and saw how well it fit together into a whole. I really like that approach. And it seemed to fit a lot of how we work conceptually these days, and I kind of like the idea behind it. I thought their overall document was pretty clear. Yeah, it was concise. It didn't get into a lot of data detail. I think it's good to know that, but I think maybe we should think about, if we want that, maybe it belongs in a separate document, and we want to keep our plan itself a little more general, a little more readable. I thought those things were important.
So again,
Was that added for emphasis?
yes, I think so. All Right, and we're still trying to figure out the quirks.
Are you haunting us, Carlos?
Are you guys working in the council chambers? I'm wondering if it makes sense to do it in separate rooms. You know, with you and Jonathan being in, you know, in separate rooms to avoid the echoing.
Yeah, we had.
Imagine one of you has to mute your mic. Or mute your speaker.
I think we're being hacked by a theremin.
Testing. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
There goes again.
Well, while we're waiting, Carol, is there anything else that you had regarding that Kirkwood plan?
I'm trying to think what else I had drafted an email to Carlos and Jonathan with my thoughts when I first read it. And I'm not remembering that there really was anything else. But one of the things that I did want to mention is that, and some of this is my familiarity with the local firms, but I've changed my position 100% from when I was working. But now I think that there really is some value in having an out-of-town firm come in and take a fresh look at our community. And I think there's value in that, especially, you know, as somebody who isn't as familiar with us. I think we saw a lot of that value come through in the plan that we're using today. I think we got a lot of good guidance from them. And I'm not saying we wouldn't get that from a local firm, but I think just having a pair of fresh eyes taking a look at us it has some value to it.
That's a good point. It's interesting. I mean, there'd be added costs with them being out of town.
Definitely.
But it is definitely an interesting point. Carlos, are you going to give your mic a try?
Here I go. Seems like it's. Sounds like it's okay. I think that some of the things Marvin kind of noted, what you guys are hearing sounds different to what we're hearing in the back room also. I think our problem is that there's speakers in the chamber, and we're trying to figure out how we get those muted. Jonathan and I are talking through the same system, so you know his speaker's interconnected to his mic is interconnected to my mic, so it's not an issue of the two competing mics. I think we're trying to figure out that it's an issue with the speaker system over the audience area, and it seems like Barb got some of that resolved. So if it does come up, I'll be quick to try to mute myself so it doesn't. You don't have to hear that background noise.
Back to you.
Okay. Well, and that's all we have for the comprehensive plan. We'll continue to have our discussions in this and talk with the council as we get closer to the upcoming budget discussions.
And that's gonna dictate the schedule, correct?
Correct. We kind of look at it, the goal has been, and the council has seemed to be supportive of, that we would budget for the update in 2 fiscal years. So therefore, it's not one big increment that, in 1 year, so that this coming fiscal year 21, and it's an ever-changing world now, so, this was the thought process, a month ago, that we would budget for half of the costs in fiscal year 21 and the other half in fiscal year 22, or excuse me, I got those fiscal years wrong, 22 and 23 in there, that this would be a process, if we pursued it, that we would be kicking off the planning process sometime in December, January, to utilize the spring, summer for public engagement, and then wrap up, fall 2022 and get into winter of 23 to have the final product.
Okay.
Sounds long, but it goes fast, trust me.
That sounds good.
Rob, I just want to mention that I remember one of the RFPs that we looked at, they went through a kind of an outline of what they expected in the citizen engagement and what kind of product they were looking at. And I think it's something that we should consider doing something similar, and that for any consultant that we're thinking about, we should give them some sort of guidance as to what we are looking for community engagement. And maybe it's some, parts of that we can ultimately do ourselves, and we tell them that. But I think that, for me, whenever I was doing a plan and responding to an RFP, the most difficult part to respond to was to what do we, the consultant, think that the community is going to want for community engagement. And it was always a wild guess. And I think the idea of outlining the major components of that would really help a consultant know they want $10,000 worth of engagement, or they want $250,000 worth. I mean, you can do a plan and easily spend that much. And I think a consultant is really going to need to know that.
I agree.
Okay, Carol, this is Mike. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts on what you saw as successful community engagement plans when you were doing this.
I think a lot of it would depend on the needs of that community. For instance, like I did a plan many years ago. I worked on a plan for Chesterfield, and we did a lot of very local neighborhood meetings. On the other hand, I've done a lot of just open house type events. I've done just the standard old school, one public hearing that's required by the state statute, and that's it. So it really varies. In our case, since we're so small, I think ideally we could have some very local neighborhood meetings and have some discussions and build on those. And we probably want to do an open house or two and something along those lines. But I think keeping the fact that we're small enables us to at least consider doing something on a very localized level very effectively.
Well, that being said, anybody else have any other comments or thoughts on this? Hearing none, I think we'll just move on. Let's go to item 3, other business. Item A is meeting minutes, but I don't believe we have any. So I think well, before we move on to reports, Carlos, should we look at to see if we have any public comments at this point in time?
So far, the only comments I have is from Bruce McGregor, who is one of our the Public Works Director. noting some of the sound quality being good, but a bit echoey. He couldn't hear Rob consistently. And then he did note of a corner lot with a backyard pool at 9777 Lindley regarding the fence enclosures, and that's been it.
On where my mic is. All right, let's go on to reports. Carlos?
Okay, regarding council, they will have their first work session next Tuesday on April 7th, and then they are scheduled for their regular meetings on April 14th and 28th. We will have a text amendment that was recommended by the commission regarding the temporary construction signage at the April 28th for a public hearing. On the commission, our next meeting is April 16th. I believe we have at least 3 residential projects for action. We received 2 plats, one for the what is now called the Olivette Crossing, aka the Olivette Gateway, and the other plat is for the city center property that are scheduled, and probably an amendment or revision to the Firestone development at here at the what would be the southeast corner of Dillman and Olive. It's about the building placement. Then our next scheduled meetings for May are the 7th and the 21st. I would assume at least for the month of April, I wouldn't be surprised if longer, that the process for our meetings will be similar to today. Again, tonight was an opportunity to try to work out a lot of the bugs and see how we can make this improve on this, and hopefully we will get there for the 16th. On the meeting on the 16th, we'll have additional participants, each of those being the petitioners, and we'll have to kind of work on the logistics of how that is coordinated, give them an opportunity to address the commission, take comments and questions from the commission, and also have their petitions illustrated in front of you, so you can comment as they're talking, both for you and the petitioner. So we'll try to figure all that out as we go through this process. And if there's any questions, thoughts, recommendations, please let me know. Jonathan or I, we're trying to make this as best as we can. Regarding city events, there is no municipal court, it looks like, through the month of April. The Prop C meetings have been, for the most part, been rescheduled. I'll let the mayor kind of address if there's any thoughts on how that's being set up. For the 90th anniversary events, again, unfortunately for all the things going on in the world today, the dinner dance has been postponed, and I believe Party in the Park has also been postponed. I think the August 29th open house is still on track. Reminder to everyone, you should have be responding to the 2020 census. Every household and body counts in the process. It's not only important to Olivette, but to the school district, a lot of nonprofits, the state, the county, the region. That can be done online. As of yesterday, we were checking, and I believe it was posted on Facebook. Olivette was, I think, 47% of our households had responded online. The county average was about 35. Don't quote me on the numbers, but I know it's in there. So, we have almost close to 50% responding, and of course, those are being done via the internet. And unfortunately, with everything going on, I'm sure there's a lot of other things people are doing too. Reminder: Republic Waste, in an effort to maintain their manpower and resources, they're not doing yard waste pickups on Wednesday. In an effort to help our residents, our Public Works Director has coordinated a process to provide yard waste drop-off at the Olivette Public Works Building at 1200 North Price. That is permitted today and next week between the hours of 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. or noon. And there's only 3 days out of those 5 days. The information is posted on the city's website. So if you get an opportunity, or if you have some bags that you've collected and you want to drop off, the information's on the website in terms of the dates and times in there. And then, of course, municipal elections have been rescheduled from April 7th to June 2nd. And there are a couple of updates. The I-170 Gateway Development, that's now the Olivette Crossing. They will be bringing in their plating documents to our April 16th meeting, and I anticipate that we will have some new visuals regarding the proposed improvements and the building designs coming in. And there, I'm not sure when those will be scheduled for action, certainly not the April 16th, but I don't know if we'll have an update on that same date on the 16th. But it makes it real complicated on how we do the virtual meetings in there and get that information out, but we'll do the best as possible. As you can see, they're pretty much cleared all the tree area. If you look behind the office max, you get a pretty good visual on the site and how deep it is. And there, the office max is going through its closure. I'm not sure what the final scheduled date of their closing will be in terms of store operations, that is. MSD has completed the underground work on I-170, and then Keat Properties, along with Keeley Properties, will take up the improvements from that point on and do a lot of the MSD infrastructure work. That's not necessarily set for this site. It's supposed to be part of the 82nd Street Relief Project and the Lindley Relief Project. And there. We hope to get the site fenced and closed by early next week, and then the demolition of the structures will begin, weather pending, and of course with everything going on, if all goes well. They were doing some excavations on Price this morning, and that was to terminate the water service lines, I believe to the service station and two of the homes that are addressed off of Price. Regarding the city center redevelopment area, we've been in discussions with the developer. Seems like things are still a go. They've been doing a lot of the investigatory work regarding hazardous abatement with the city building, and hopefully we'll be seeing a demolition permit submitted within the next 2 weeks or so, and that area starting to begin to get raised. On the Centennial Greenway, there's been no changes from the last update. There was a meeting with Union Pacific regarding the excess railroad right-of-way that kind of parallel or goes diagonal with Price. There was a discussion about access on Napoleon at the intersection of Napoleon and Dealman. There's a pretty big hill and a retaining wall there. And then, of course, a crossing at the Gateway development, or Olivette Crossing development. In there, and of course, part of Proposition P impacts, or Proposition C impacts the alignment in Warson Park. So there's a lot of moving parts in that process that we're trying to make sure that all get coordinated. We've had discussions with the developers with Easy Storage. Their site improvement work continues on. The fences were kind of blown down with the windstorm last weekend. Those have been addressed, but they still are pursuing the development and continue to go on. And then, of course, the southeast corner of Dealman and Olive, that one has gone through and received council approval. We're working with the landscape architects that did the Olivette Boulevard conceptual master plan to put together a design for the corner. But there is a request from the developer to look at the building placement along Olive, not on Dealman, but on the Olive side. And that will be at your next meeting agenda on the 16th. I think that covers all the big developments, projects that are going outside of the Plant Haven, which they've indicated they're still moving along on that project where the old Ponderosa was. I'd be glad to answer any specific questions.
This is a question more for the mayor, but I'm curious, since St. Louis County is closing the parks till April 22nd, do you know if we'll be closing our parks as well, or?
Well, right now we are complying with the expectations and requests of the St. Louis County executive. Our park equipment and play and our restrooms and things of that nature, they are closed. But the actual park space themselves, people can still go and deal with walking or riding their bike or doing whatever's necessary. We are monitoring whether there's going to be larger crowds than what is being requested of 10 people or less, and keeping your social distances. But at this point, our parks are not closed to physically being in them and walking or doing your exercise or things with your pets or your kids. Does that answer your inquiry?
Yeah, no, I was just curious.
And then I'm going to add on to that, we also have Kiana Fleming, our communications manager, who's also pushing out things every day. I know you're all aware of that, but pushes out on Facebook, pushes out on Constant Contact, pushes out on Twitter, and the information is always fluid and updated on the Olivette website as well. So anything with regards to any inquiries, we also have the Park and Rec, have their own little page that they have information on. So those are the best ways to stay in touch with what is the latest. The big magic word today is fluid. I think our city staff and administration have been fluid for 2 weeks. They've been doing a great job staying solid while things are fluid. And I hope that helps you with your inquiry there, then. Any other questions?
Do you have anything to add with your report?
I do have a couple questions I do want to ask of Carlos, just for my ability to hear what I thought I heard, or to clarify that I did not hear it correctly. And I heard that the discussion of comprehensive plan, our land plan would be budgeted in 2 fiscal years. First I wrote 21 and 22, then I thought I heard 22, 23, but then I also heard I thought something else would be done in 23. So if I could just get that clarity of, and I realize we don't know what's going to happen with income, revenue, budgets, money flow, but if you could clarify that for me again.
Absolutely. It's a good question. I always get confused. The fiscal year is always the back end of the year. So right now, we started fiscal year 21 on July 1, 2019. So the request for the comprehensive plan will be in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. Fiscal year 22 starts July 1, 2021.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to comment on is, as somebody indicated, that perhaps, the group that works with us is someone from an out-of-state entity. We did do that with Vanderwall in 2004, 5, 6, and I think the city prospered from that outside of the local area assistance and perspective. So that's just historical. We did have public input processes, numerous, at various different locations. I think Carol was pretty spot on with regards to those things that we can do ourselves, as well as using the professionals with a more city council hands-off, letting the citizens provide their own input. Historically, it was an interesting background of input and information from folks in 2004 and 5, and I think that was a vector report. And back to today, Carlos always does a wonderful job summarizing things. I truly don't have much more to add with regards to any future dates. There really are no future dates at this time. To try to put one out, as the city manager has indicated in calls with council, it really is not, it's not feasible at this time, because we still don't know what we don't know. And I'm going to go out on the limb and say I do believe that our shelter in place will continue longer than even what our county executive implemented as April 22nd. So hopefully, the staff will continue to do the awesome job that they're doing. Some level of outreach and education will come to the citizens in an electronic format, since the gathering aspect may not be very successful, and they're always looking at what is the best opportunity use on this electronic world that we're living in today. So with that, I just want to say thank you all. Thank you all for what you're doing. To the staff that has done this, to continue providing the testing and changing the formats to make it even better. It is much appreciated. The council appreciates you very much. One last note, if anyone is curious, we will continue with the way we do business in the city of Olivette, even though there's not going to be an election April 7th. Typically, the fourth meeting of, the fourth Tuesday, the second meeting of city council in April is typically the changing of the guard. That will happen. I have no problem with that happening without an election, and neither does the rest of the council. So there will be the changing of the guard. I will go down to council. Ruth Springer will move up to the mayor, and Sidney Clark should be nominated as the mayor pro tem. That is what I anticipate and what I expect to happen, and I think that everyone is in agreement with that fluidity moving forward. Having said that, I will say one more thing. Our pro tem will become the president of the municipal league this year. Typically, it used to happen, I think, in April, Carol, and then we would have a dinner, dance, and celebration and installation in May.
you guys have a
I think
meeting
all
yesterday?
that's not going to happen, but I do believe that the transition
Ferguson.
of Mayor Knowles from
For-
Ferguson as the president of the municipal league to the Honorable Mayor
for
Pro
what
Tem
reason?
Ruth Springer will take place, and
Yeah, for
that
what
will be a
reason
good
did it cancel?
win-win for our community, and the communications
Because
go back and
of
forth
the COVID-19 or?
between cities and municipal executive bodies. So that's really the most important thing that I think you all need to know. Carlos, that's it on my end. I appreciate it. You've done a great job. So has the city manager, Jonathan, Mr. McGregor, and his feedback. I appreciate it. You all take care. I'm going to turn my mic off now, unless anyone has any questions of me.
Anyone have any questions?
Chairman, a couple of things, and I know everybody's anxious or tired too, but I do appreciate the full commission participation tonight. It's important that we continue business in our community, not just for our residents or the developers or the businesses and such, but you know, we're doing our best to make sure that our services are there like they should be. Just a couple of things just to kind of note. Through the Buildings Inspection Division, we're still conducting or coordinating with developers on inspections. Several communities have kind of stopped in there, and we leave it to our inspectors as long as they feel comfortable and safe. We have policies in place to make sure that they follow through and keep themselves, minimized in terms of any contamination or whatever the correct term would be. In there, we're doing plan reviews electronically, where traditionally we've always done them on paper. This week alone, we got at least 5 building permits that are being reviewed. We had probably 5 last week. And for the end of March, over $320,000 in construction valuation for residential improvements. And that's kind of slow. Spring's really our busy season, but we're happy that we had that amount. We're still doing occupancy. We're figuring out how best to do occupancy inspections for changes of ownership. We've come up with solutions and worked with our apartment managers throughout the community on how we're doing this to facilitate their as their business is also being impacted. We reached out to every restaurant in the city of Olivette, and Jonathan's put together a pretty impressive GIS map identifying the services that they're providing to our residents in our community. And can't tell you enough, support your local businesses. Chevy's says kids eat free, and that was through having discussions with them of how we can try to help improve the environment. You'll see stories like Fallon's and Sugar Fire, where they're kind of trading hours to help the business there at the crossing. And Olivette Diner is continuing to run, and they're providing morning curbside services. We've been in discussions with the UPS store on what they can do and how we can help facilitate their continued exposure and operation in there, and the city managers having us prepare a mass email so we can forward to our businesses information that's available from the county, from the state, and from the feds regarding economic assistance and things of that nature. We are probably a handful of communities that are continuing to have our commission meetings, probably even council meetings. So we take pride in that. Ona and I wouldn't be here tonight if we didn't. So.
And if I could
That's
caveat
important.
on that, it speaks to the leadership of the staff and the employees of the city of Olivette and you volunteers with what we just heard from Carlos, that there are cities that are not continuing business, and you have PCDC, you have city council, you have pension boards, you have other things going on within our community. So again, kudos to the people that really run the city, from the city manager, administration down. You guys really rock it. You're great.
Chairman.
Thank you, Carlos. Appreciate it. I guess now, with no other further comments, we'll adjourn the meeting at 8:52. Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Thanks, you guys. Everybody be safe.
Likewise.